Welcome to Talking Feds One-on-One, deep dive discussions with national figures about the most fascinating and consequential issues defining our culture and shaping our lives. I'm your host, Harry Littman. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Talking Feds One-on-One. I'm really pleased to be here with Representative Greg Casar. He is the representative for the Texas 35th Congressional District. He was elected in January 2023, and I think it's fair to say he's one of the few recent successes in a state not known for its warmth to progressive politicians. I'll also just say right up front, so you know how important a new figure in Congress he is the fastest man or woman in Congress, having won the 5K race in the deathless blood match that they have in Congress every year. And you wrested it from Republican rule after how many races?
I think like something like 16 or 17 years.
There you go. So he's an up-and-comer for sure. Okay, let's just start with this idea of you as progressive politician and what most people think of as an arid territory for progressives. I think of just at the state level, you were in Austin City Council before, but at the state level, dominance really perennial in both legislative chambers, usually at all the state office holders, and then a whole series of difficult issues to sort of push back against or fight for as a progressive: abortion access and gun violence and voting laws and the like. So pretty challenging environment. What's besides your raw speed, what factors do you think contributed to your winning the seat?
Well, the face that I see a lot of people make when I introduce myself as a progressive from Texas, I recognize the faces. They're usually thinking about Ted Cruz or Greg Abbott, and they make that face. And it's not a great face. Right. But when I think about Texas, I don't think about Cruz and Abbott. I think of Barbara Jordan and Ann Richards and LBJ, a president from Texas who signed the Civil Rights Act into law, the Voting Rights Act, created Medicaid and Head Start. So Texas actually has a long progressive history.
Well, let me stop you because fair enough, yes, but that's at a time, in fact, before the Southern Strategy, before 68, before the complete abandonment of Democrats in the South. So fair enough on Barbara Jordan, fair enough on Governor Richards, but nevertheless, you stand out.
And I think, but I think that's actually exactly the point. There was a coalition that held together for a really long time in Texas of progressives and then those folks that were able to have an economic message, an economic vision of the Democratic Party being the party of the working person. Yeah. And I think that that's what it's going to take for continued progressive and democratic success in Texas. And we're seeing the Democratic Party finally start going more and more in that direction. And that's actually relatively recently a new phenomenon that was led by progressives saying, hey, let's talk about these core economic issues that the vast majority of the country believes in, like taxing the wealthiest and not having the IRS audit a plumber and teacher. Instead, let's go after the guy's private jet that he's doing a tax write-off on. And that used to be kind of seen as, well, that's just what Bernie Sanders is talking about. That's no longer the case. Yeah. I was with Secretary Yellen just yesterday at our big IRS center here in Austin, in my district, and that's what she spoke to. And I think that's what rebuilds dominance of the party. Isn't just that demographics is destiny in Texas. It's actually that talking about both civil rights issues, but also economic rights issues, I think is what brings together the coalition we need to take back the state.
Were you at the convention, and that it was a very notable emphasis on exactly that. We are for the middle class because we are of the middle class. And it has seemed, just from a progressive point of view, vexing or frustrating that a Democratic platform, which you would think would be so much more naturally embraced by working people and who are the majority in Texas, like most places, that somehow the Republicans recently, including Donald Trump, have managed to persuade those voters that the Republicans are more on their side. So, again, you really have, maybe it's starting, but you swum against the current. You had, now much of your district is Austin, of course, and Austin's, notably been, keep Austin weird and different, et cetera. But how'd you do it, man?
Well, I think that part of what it is also having that authentic relationship with your voters. Because I have voters that disagree with me on some of the issues where there's been culture wars waged and that are a little bit more of lightning rod issues. But they say at the end of the day, we know you care about making sure my kid has a sidewalk to walk to on its way to school. And we appreciate that you're willing to stand up to Elon Musk, who's moving his operations to your district, and say, hey, you don't need to be mistreating the working people that work in your factory. And there shouldn't be folks getting hurt on the job or killed on the job. And I think that's what brings people along. There need to be these authentic messengers so that we can show the inauthenticity of the right wing and of these Republican officials that frankly don't stand up for their own Republican voters. They say that they're for the working class and the middle class and everyday people, but then they make their first priority tax cuts for billionaires and their corporate buddies. The perfect example is my first bill I was asked to vote on, put onto the floor by the Republican speaker, wasn't about inflation, wasn't about public safety. The first bill the Republicans put up to vote in this Congress was to cut the IRS's additional money that's being used to enforce tax law against mega tax cheats and against these corporations that are offshoring jobs and trying to hide their money from the American people. That was priority number one from the Republican Congress. And I think if voters hear that message consistently from Democrats, that will bring people around.
I can just add on that one, having been at DOJ, just the facts, CBO or whatever would just say, that was cutting that or increasing the fraud enforcement in IRS. It just redounds triple, quadruple.
It's a deficit reducer to make sure that, a billionaire hiding their money has to actually pay their modest amount of taxes that we ask them to pay. I mean, frankly, their tax rate should be higher if they're a billionaire, but they don't even pay that.
Yeah, but even leaving that aside, it's just demonstrated that it's really penny foolish and pound foolish, I guess you could say. All right, well, let's stick with another hot button issue, representative in Texas certainly, but everywhere now, especially in the coming election of immigration. You remarked last month, our politics have been pushed so far to the right on immigration by Donald Trump that we have to fight back to realign our politics on immigration back to where they were just a few years ago. So, what is your thinking about how they've been wrenched out of a normal kind of, with a chance for consensus? And what is the solution? Are you, for example, the bill that the both houses that was before that Biden and Harris now support, pretty conservative bill, but Trump said veto it because Trump said don't pass it because it'll be bad for the campaign. Are you talking about something like that or more progressive on immigration, would you say?
What I'm talking about is where we were just about 10 years ago, which was actually the first time I went to the Hill. The Gang of Eight, a gang of Democratic and Republican senators working together, had a bill that said that was going to pass the House and the Senate that said there was going to be a trade. There would be some more conservative border policy, and there was going to be an actual recognition and bringing out of the black market the millions and millions of Americans that have been here 10, 20, 30 years who are not granted any sort of pathway or any way to earn their citizenship. And that's devastating and terrible for them and for the whole country. And it was going to pass the Congress. And Speaker John Boehner regrets this now, but at the time didn't have the backbone to put it on the floor, which would have been voted into law and would have helped fix our immigration system and help avoid some of the less orderly migration that we're dealing with today if they'd actually passed a better system. What Trump has led the Republicans towards is to have them be the arsonists of the immigration system, make it as broken as possible. People like Ken Paxton, our attorney general in Texas, sue the federal government to get rid of legal migration programs, to force people that are desperate to have no other option than to find some other way since there aren't legal paths. So they've been the arsonists.
barriers, literally,
literal
by
barriers,
the state government.
that people can die in front of. And so they are the arsonists. And then when anybody comes and tries to fix the system, the firefighters, they blame the firefighters for the fire. And that is the current Republican platform on immigration. Break it as much as possible, complain about it being broken, and then keep it broken. And I think that the Democratic platform needs to not just be Republican light. We should actually talk about immigration being good. It's good for the country. It's good for people. And we can build a system where it's orderly, safe, and legal. And that's where we were in that kind of compromise a decade ago. Today, I was at the convention and I heard the vice president state clearly that she wants to have a bill that includes more security measures, but she also voiced her support for comprehensive immigration reform and pathways to citizenship. And I would be proud to send a bill to a President Harris's desk that included both of those elements. And I think that's the direction the country actually wants us to go in. There's all this fear-mongering and blaming of a vulnerable group going on right now in our politics. That doesn't fix anything. But I think actually creating a more orderly and legal system for people and providing some relief to the people that have been contributing to our country and a part of this country for 5, 10, 20 years, I think that's a bill that we should get behind.
It's a really strange kind of issue because when you talk about each part, people generally voice their support. Ro Khanna we've just interviewed and is doing a one-on-one from Silicon Valley may be the wealthiest district in the country, if not one of the few. But he had very much the same thing to say, not just the tradition of the country, but really the current, economic exigency of having a fair-minded economic policy. And you don't find, to my mind, it's so noteworthy that Trump will have a rally in Michigan, and he's talking about the Texas border, and it's it's this one-sided image of thousands and thousands, however much he says, murderers coming over the border, et cetera. But what's odd about that, of course, is nobody advocates murderers coming over the border, but they advocate a balanced immigration policy.
Well, it's the oldest trick in the book.
It really is.
The oldest trick in the book is pick a group of people that are poor, pick a group of people that probably don't have the right to vote or they don't vote
especially
much.
If they're not part of the
and pick on them. That way, it's not clear that the real Trump policy being advocated is for him to extend his tax scam, which continues to benefit his billionaire buddies, right? He doesn't want people looking at that. Greg Abbott wants to be beating up on trans kids in schools, both to fire up some hateful people, but also because he doesn't want you talking about the fact that he's defunding your public schools and taking teachers out of your schools and making it so that kids don't have the textbooks and the learning that they need. And so we have to, I think, as progressives and as a party, get better at not shying away from those issues, but actually leaning in, standing up for the rights of everyone, but then connecting it to why it is that the Republicans are actually the ones waging the culture war. I'd rather not be fighting the culture war. Let people live however they want to live, and let's focus on those core issues for voters. But we can't be baited into by the Republicans into those culture wars. We got to call them out for it and then point out what they're really up to.
Well, and look, it's really true the immigration system is broken and need 5 times the judges, et cetera. But that it is, I think, a form of sophistry, but nobody came to listen to my views. All right, let me stick with criminal justice reform, Representative Casar. You've been a strong advocate for banning the box. What's that mean, and what are you trying to fight back against?
So when I was a city council member, we saw how many places the state and federal government weren't advancing civil rights policy or protections for people. And so I was one of the very first policies I pursued was fair chance hiring in our city, which is both a civil rights policy and a public safety policy that says that people should get a chance to interview for a job, show their qualifications, and go through that process before a criminal background check is run. Now, of course, if they have criminal history that's relevant to the job, employers could still take that in consideration, hire and not hire the people who want to hire and not hire. But that policy has been shown. It's the policy of actually giving somebody a fair shot has been shown to get people into jobs. And we know that reduces recidivism, makes people safer.
Is that what you mean by the public safety aspect?
The public safety aspect is if folks are coming out of the criminal justice system, we tell them get to work, and then their job applications just get thrown in the trash because when they check a box, their job application is just thrown out, then the chances of them winding back up in jail go way up. And we don't want folks that come out of jail to wind back up in jail. We want them in jobs. So we wanted to pursue that. And our governor recently signed a bill into law that they proudly call the Death Star bill, referring to Star Wars. I don't know. When I watched Star Wars, I didn't want to be on the Death Star, evil empire side. I don't get it. To eliminate local civil rights and worker protections. So they were targeting things like ban the box, fair chance hiring. They also got rid of our water break protections, which was a law that just said, if you're up on a scaffold all day working in the heat, that you've got a right to be able to come off the scaffold and get a drink of water and take a rest break. It did not crush the construction boom in Austin. We have more construction projects here than virtually anywhere else in the country. It just protected people's lives. But what we've seen—
And you had an unusual creative way of bringing visibility to that issue. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah. So we passed that law locally. The governor came and passed the Death Star bill eliminating the local laws. But we didn't let that be the end of the story. After I left the city council and came to Congress, I brought about 100 Texans together on the steps of the U.S. Capitol now to not drink water in the sun all day. Texas is hot. D.C. is actually really hot and humid. So we stayed there all day. And
you were yourself.
Not drinking water, standing on the House steps. Union leaders showed up. The majority leader of the House came and talked. Got a call from the Secretary of Labor saying, I think you're going to appreciate something the president has to say here pretty soon. And President Biden 2 days later announced increased enforcement efforts on making sure workers have their access to water and a rule that now the Biden administration wants to put into effect, giving back this right to water, not just to Texans, but to 36 million workers across the country.
And the argument against it, by the way, is less efficiency in the construction projects? Really, what is the argument against water?
I don't know. But, I was with Dolores Huerta, who was Cesar Chavez's partner in union work. And she flew from California in for the thirst strike event. And she said, man, me and Cesar had been working on this since we were kids. And the construction lobby and the big ag lobby traditionally fought and stopped these sorts of things. And I think one thing I heard from a business lobbyist at my city council days that was very transparent from him, and I appreciated the honesty no matter how much I disagreed with it. He said, well, if y'all get water breaks, what are you going to ask for next? And so in so many ways, it's kind of like the NRA saying, the NRA doesn't want any gun safety laws. We know that there are many businesses that already do this and many business leaders that are for the water breaks law, but there's some part of the special interest lobby that says, they don't want any environmental rules. They don't want any worker rules.
I see. Nose in the tent, as it were. You mentioned Johnson, and he really came to fame in Texas for basically connecting, bringing to unincorporated parts, power and modernizing.
And public housing. A bunch of the first public housing in the nation is here in my district where he used to represent.
And there you go. But you've got a sort of 21st century version of that, I think, with the Connect the Grid Act. Want to explain that?
So we need so much more electricity in this country, both as we grow and as we transfer to a more electricity-based, cleaner economy. And to do that, we need a modern-day grid across America. But there is a donut hole in the middle of the grid named Texas. Texas...
it's a big state, I hear.
It's a big state. Yeah. I'm reminded by my colleagues from Alaska that we're the second biggest state by mass. But big state right in the middle of the country that is largely completely disconnected. And that was kind of a theoretical thing for most Texans until we had the Winter Storm Uri, in which millions of Texans lost power, hundreds of people lost their lives, massive suffering across the state. But there wasn't these massive power outages in a couple places, like El Paso, Texas on the western edge of the state or Beaumont on the eastern edge of the state, because those very edges actually are interconnected with the other grids. They could pull in power from neighboring states where there wasn't a gigantic storm. And that's when we all started asking the question, why are we not interconnected? So the Connect the Grid Act would have Texas be interconnected. An MIT study of the bill said that it would have, if this bill had passed and was in effect, we could have avoided about 80% of those mass blackouts by our electric grid operator, ERCOT, saved a bunch of lives. And if we're interconnected, on top of saving lives in a storm, it lets us pull in power, but it also lets us push power out when other people need it. And in Texas, we got a lot of wind and a lot of sun, famously also. So it could actually help us develop jobs and a stronger economy in parts of rural Texas that could export more clean energy. And I think it's got a chance of going from being a partisan bill to a bipartisan, just baseline infrastructure idea, because it just doesn't make sense to be not part of the United States of America. We gotta learn to be proud of our Texas football and our Texas barbecue and not have our independent Texas grid. I don't think many people think that's a good idea anymore.
You're in this very interesting position. You can sort of analogize you to young Republicans in Congress, say, in the 90s. And I wonder if you have a kind of long-term plan. But maybe you can come back and talk about this, because I don't want to miss the chance of having you here to talk about the, of course, Austin music scene and why it is. So I think it's still considered we're
the live music capital of the world, man. We are.
Well, $1.8 billion, South by Southwest, festival after festival. But this is a serious question. I interviewed not long ago, this probably a little before your time, but the old 97s, Miller Sailhair. And we were talking about how music scenes have dried up in a sense because of the way kids consume music. You don't have a chance for the same sort of organic growth of people just hanging out there listening alone in their living rooms. So what is it that's made Austin literally and remains the live music capital of the world?
We have to protect our music venues and our artists alike. And I think Austin can show how other communities can become live music hubs too, because music is an incredible thing that brings us together. And I think that as more and more people migrate to listen to music on their phone, you start losing some of that in people. Then I think after the pandemic, I've realized getting together and hearing a live show, you just can't replace that.
They haven't realized it in other places, but they have here.
And I think when people visit here, and what I talk to people about all the time is, think about making your city a little bit more like the places you want to go visit. When I talk about making Austin a more walkable city, it's like, well, when you go visit a place, you talk about not liking having a car and being able to walk around. Let's do that here. People come visit Austin and see live music. Think about how you can, I think, just like public resources go to other arts, we should think about putting public resources into preserving and building out independent venues, because that's part of what builds us up and lifts us up. And so we have any night of the week. I mean, I love going to ACL and South by, but when I have folks visit, I say, come visit on a random weekend or even a random weekday, and we can see some of the best shows in town. And so as a city council member, worked on extending hours for some of our live music venues so they don't have to close early, making sure that they stayed open during the pandemic. And we really want to support those artists too, because I do think actually the greatest threat to Austin's live music scene is our loss of affordability. Because
ticket prices are really going up here. Is that right?
Yeah, ticket prices have gone up for some of the bigger shows. We want to keep some, we want people to be able to pay the musicians, but I'd say the loss of affordability in housing more than anything else, because musicians, if they have to go bust their butts working 60 hours a week, then that's less time to be creative and create your music. When we say starving musicians, we don't actually want our musicians to starve. And so figuring out, we're adding more housing supply at all income levels. We've actually managed to finally start bringing down Austin rent, but I do think that that's actually our greatest threat to the music scene. And then as far as sort of my longer term plans question, I'm really committed to being an organizer in Congress. And I think the congressional
which I should add, that's part of your professional background.
Yeah, I was a labor organizer. How do we bring people together? You run for office as an individual, but you govern as part of a team. So running is an individual sport, but actually the governance part is a team sport. And the Congressional Progressive Caucus, I think, can do so much work, especially with the upcoming expiration of the Trump tax scam. I think to work together as a team and really get that progressive message out there, but then deliver progressive results. Because if we're able to deliver some results, continue delivering those results, I think wins inspire more wins. So that's my hope, is to be able to show that the team can deliver next year.
Greg Casar, fastest man in Congress. I think you may be at the beginning of a very long federal career. Thanks for being here.
Appreciate you.
Thank you for tuning in to One on One, a weekly conversation series from Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts, and please take a moment to rate and review this podcast. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we post full episodes, talking books, and bonus video content. Talking Feds remains one of the very few independent productions out there. So if you like the work we do and are inclined to support the show, joining our Patreon is the best way to do it. Plus, you'll get tons of perks like free access to my LA Times op-eds and the chance to join monthly live Q&A sessions. Thanks for tuning in, and don't worry, as long as you need answers, the Feds will keep talking. Talking Feds One-on-One is produced by Catherine Devine, associate producer Gabriella Glick, sound engineering by Matt McArdle, Rosie Dawn Griffin, Hamza Mahendranathan, David Lieberman, and Emma Maynard are our contributing writers. Production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu and Genesis Magpayo. Our music, as ever, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.